changed my topic a little. I was supposed to provide an overview of copyright, which I decided was like way too much to do in 20 minutes, and probably not the most helpful thing for the audience who is sitting here today. So in trying to decide what my opening remarks should be, I was basically thinking about who is sitting here and what would probably be the most helpful thing for you. And I'm assuming that most of the people here are working in some sort of cultural institution, whether it's a library, academic library, a school library, a museum, or an archive. And in that capacity, you encounter issues that have to do with copyright. If you have encountered these types of issues, I think that one of the things that you may be realizing is that so much more than just copyright is involved. And the things that you are dealing with really expand way beyond copyright into areas of contract law, into areas of privacy, into areas of libel. So copyright is sort of like an umbrella term, but when you actually begin to deal with the day-to-day of it, it really extends into other areas as well. So what I decided to do was just divide it into some of the main areas that we touch upon when we are dealing with the big copyright issues in our cultural institutions, and what are the copyright and related issues that you should be aware of. So first of all, just like a quick, what is copyright? Copyright is something that gives the owners of a work some sort of limited monopoly over what they can do with that work. And that limited monopoly is limited in two ways. The first way that it is limited in the length, in the time in which they have that monopoly. So, as most of you know now, for just like simple, straightforward works, original creations, it's a lifetime of an author plus 70 years. That's a limitation in terms of the time. Another limitation to that monopoly is a limitation in terms of what it is they can permit or not permit. And although the copyright owner does have a lot of ownership rights, they are limited. The law allows some limitations in terms of what are most known to us in libraries as fair use and for sale doctrine that allow users to do things beyond that. It's important to remember that it's a limited monopoly. So while copyright is there to provide an incentive for creation and to protect some of the financial interests of the owners, it is also there to protect the users and allow them access to the works as well. Another thing that you should keep in mind when you're dealing with copyright is that it is open to interpretation, and a lot of the conventional wisdoms don't really hold. There seems to be a lot of libraries or a lot of people who promote the notion that there is a certain page limit over which you may or may not copy, or a sequence of musical notes or things like that. Those are sort of like it's the urban myth of copyright. They don't really exist in that way. Each time you address a copyright problem, you kind of start from the beginning. There are common sense rules that applies, there are fair use criteria that applies, but there is no 10% rule or half a chapter rule or anything like that. Another thing to keep in mind is that really while there are legitimate reasons for copyright and the owners do have interests that need to be protected, they're recognizing that need shouldn't be a factor of intimidation for people working in cultural institutions. So you don't need to kind of buy into this culture of fear or bullying that comes from perhaps commercial interests that say you cannot do many of the things that you actually can do, and I'm sure will come up from speakers as we go on. Eventually you will have to take a stand, and it is a lot more is up to you than you will want it to be. And you will have to consult people, and the people that you'll consult will actually kind of determine which direction that you're going to. If you work in an institution that has just like legal counsel. Most of the time this legal counsel deals with, you know, personnel issues, and you ask them a copyright question, they're not going to want to take any risk. Their answer is always going to be, don't do it. So even if you're going for legal counsel, make sure that the legal counsel that you are seeking is one that has a specialty and that has the interests of your users in mind. Okay, one of the things that we're also seeing, in addition to the fact that we have copyright and that it allows us to do several things, we're also seeing an erosion in copyright. Increasingly, we're seeing it from several areas. So one group, or one area in which we're seeing erosion in copyright is that from the lobbying groups. Whether it is the film industry or the music industry, they're increasing their lobbying efforts. They're more aggressively pursuing end users and institutions in the form of lawsuits, in the forms of threats of lawsuits. So there are enforcing this culture where we feel that we shouldn't take the risk and do things. Other areas in which we're seeing erosion is really just from legislation, from proposed legislations, bills that are in Congress, treaties, court rulings. Some recent cases that some of you may be aware of are things like ACTA or the recent ruling in net neutrality, which again limits what we can do. And I think that in libraries and other cultural institutions, what we're probably facing most of all are limitations to copyright when copyright is overridden by the contracts that we sign with our content providers. So we sign contracts when we lease content, whether it's a database or a data set, and we basically are signing away our rights under fair use or under what copyright law allows us, and we are subject now to our contractual agreement rather than to what copyright exemptions allow. So there are a lot of stakeholders here, and these are like some of the things that you might want to consider when you're thinking about this. Looking at copyright in terms of where people working in what I call as an umbrella term cultural institutions may encounter. I divided this into 4 areas, and I hate doing these 1, 2, 3, 4s because it can always be 5, 6, or 7, or 1, 2, and 3. So just like, you know, it's kind of like arbitrary. I was actually going to have a 5th, which I was going to call the impossible and improbable and the believe it or not, also like all the weird stories. But these are just an outcome of the basic functions of what it is that we do in libraries. So the first thing that we usually do is that we have information, we provide use of information. This is probably our most established and the area that we have most experiences. We provide users with books, we provide users with articles, we provide users with print content, we provide them with online content. We provide them with images, we subscribe to increasingly to newer things like data sets, raw data, things like that. The second area that we do is like we are increasingly creating content. So we are creating content for our own institutions, whether it is institutional repositories, learning guides, subject guides, any types of resources that we are creating. The third area that we are also involved with more is just capitalizing on some of the unique collections that we have in our library and making them available to the public. This is often in the form of digitizing a special collection or digitizing an archive. And the last area that I wanted to address is our role in libraries is managing copyright on behalf of others in our institution, whether it's for e-reserves or whether it's for faculty publications being published by scholarly journals for the most part.